Our next guest is Alexander Reid Ross. He is an adjunct lecturer at Portland State University, and he is the author of the book Against the Fascist Creep. I can't say fascist creep. And he's sporting his Joe Rogan look today. What did you plan that?
I just wanted to apologize for the bad thing that I'll never repeat again.
Apology not accepted, but we will pretend that it didn't happen and say we're not censoring you, okay? Oh man, yes. Who wore it better? I think you wore it better because there's books in the background.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the point of the bookshelf. I was trying to explain this to Joe before he critiqued my style, but he wouldn't listen.
The point of the bookshelf. So, all right. Okay, last time you were on, we noticed a little thing happening online where folks, it's been going on for about a couple months, folks who had once said that they were like on the left were suddenly like leading other well-meaning leftists into a direction of failure, to dead ends, attacking leftist leaders for not being leftist enough in Congress. I'm not even going to say the term that they were using, but then it kind of failed, and then it turned into another thing, and then another thing, and but the first hints of this were not with the force the you know what in Congress movement. They started much earlier, and I was very grateful to discover your work, and you broke it down for me. And it was like, I can't unlearn this. Now I see everything through the lens of the grand scheme of the great Steve Bannon and his best friends. So tell us, how does this whole ecosystem work? Just like that.
Well, like the thing is that Bannon was really the guy who was kind of cultivating the alt-right into the mainstream Republican Party using the Breitbart Forum. And this was really a turning point for the Republicans, which ushered in the kind of paleo-conservative Pat Buchanan populist wing, the so-called like pitchfork wing of the Republican Party, and ushered out the more kind of neoliberal trend that we'd seen in the Republican Party since really Reagan. And with Bannon really comes all this populism, right? So he'll appropriate all the economic criticisms that you'll see on the left of, inflation, real wages, the plight of the middle class, or the plight of the working class, he'll say, and then he'll direct it towards a nationalist policy in terms of economics and politics, international relations, foreign policy, and so forth. So that's kind of how his game works, and it does kind of draw from a long line of radical right politics that tends to dip into the fascist movement in order to provide cannon fodder for the sorts of private interests that he represents.
So there's this article that came out in the New York Times yesterday, and I sent it to everybody I knew, and I feel like it didn't get enough attention from anybody. And it was this piece that, and sometimes this happens in the New York Times, like where something really big comes out and no one really notices it. And then like 2 years later, some documentarian references it. It was an inspiration behind a documentary, but it took that long for it to turn into something. Erik Prince, who is like literally Dr. Evil. I mean, he is... I don't know what what he drank as a child, because obviously it was something that happened in the home because his sister is Betsy DeVos, of course. But right. Erik Prince helped raise money for a conservative spy venture to essentially infiltrate different groups, including leftist groups, including even center left Democratic parties. There was a donor aspect of this. It's been reported on in the past, but I immediately thought of kind of what's been going on in the left and in diverting attention away from real movement work and labor work, and discrediting leftists who are trying to push people towards movement labor work, and discrediting them with attacks like you're a whatever, like there's always an attack for something. Is this part of that, or is this some sort of a different thing when you read this piece?
I mean, it has a lot of fascinating kind of aspects to it, especially the fact that this has been going on for something like 5 years. You
Yeah.
know, the person who he's sort of promoting with this is a former MI6 agent who has been infiltrating American Federation of Teachers in Michigan, you know, Democratic campaigns on the small scale. So he's really been at this for a while, and also the involvement of Project Veritas is
Right.
sort of the crucial link here between Prince, this MI6 guy that he's promoting, and their efforts to run kind of stings against left-wing organizations, to infiltrate them, right? And so what we see here is a real counterintelligence strategy that in a sense is sort of privatized along with a lot of
Mm.
the military industry. So yeah, it seems to be a kind of dirty tricks operation that relies on millions of dollars in funding from people, including the Gore-Tex heiress mentioned in that piece about
Susan
Wyoming.
Goria.
Yeah,
Yep.
as well as Project Veritas's own war chest of millions of dollars from apparently anonymous sources.
Yeah, anonymous source is interesting. Um, so so let's go back to Bannon because can you help us understand like Bannon is working internationally and locally. What is who are his web of folks and simultaneously how does that overlap with this anti-vax movement? Because there are populists around the world who are uniting around anti-vax, anti-COVID, anti-government response to COVID.
Yeah, so exactly. The crowd that Bannon keeps is really fascinating. I mean, he recently had episodes of his podcast War Room hosted by Jack Posobiec, for
Mm.
example, who used to go with the alt-right title before he changed his sort of tactics.
Yeah.
There's obviously former Trump advisors like Peter Navarro. There are anti-vaxxers and white nationalists associated with the anti-immigration Tanton Network, you know, Numbers USA, and those types of organizations. And, you know, he kind of forms this node for all things populist and nationalist in a sense. So he develops real double binds wherever he goes, such that his enemies can't maneuver and he has all the freedom. And the perfect example of this is probably the COVID issue, because he continually presses. He says lying Democratic senators are lying about
Mm.
how the COVID pandemic is almost over. He's like, it's just begun. But then
What?
again, he's also fighting vaccines and he's
What?
fighting mask mandates. He's supporting the trucker convoy. Yeah, because he wants to really, he hates the Chinese Communist Party, and he wants to blame the Chinese Communist Party for the COVID pandemic, right? Because he has a particularly kind of a racist way of doing this. Um, and he wants to stress the dangers of the pandemic while at the same time accusing the Democrats of ushering in a military dictatorship. And I think you find this a lot with these kinds of figures on the far right, and that's why it's so wild that he is such a public figure, is that they live in these fantasies of their own, you know, creation where they're the protagonists fighting against the world. And so for Steve Bannon, he very much is this underground revolutionary figure who's fighting off a Democratic Party military dictatorship system and attempting to liberate the working class. I don't think that he's necessarily false in his belief in that situation, but he is clearly a delusional man.
Hmm. So he has done work in Europe. He had that monastery where he was trying to recruit, or I guess he did, to sway the EU elections. He was part of the campaign for Brexit with Niall Farage. For not, I can never say his name right. Um,
He who
and
must
then
know. not been able to.
And then of course, he just kept going, right? So the EU experiment wasn't successful, but it didn't mean that like the far right that wasn't planting the seeds for more far right leaders to grow in power. Um, Previously, you told us about how he had links to somebody who's very close, or at least at one point was very close with Putin. I'm curious a little bit more about that, Dugan, and I'm also curious about how uh, Putin's new pact with China intersects with Bannon, because Bannon being so anti China, how does this play into his political strategy at all?
It it doesn't, but it does. I mean, he's a very opportunistic guy, so he's always trying to exploit, weaknesses in his enemy. That's the
Mm-hmm.
main point. The point for Bannon is attack, attack, attack. It's not have a,
Mm.
coherent position on anything. So with regards to China, I mean, Dugin teaches now. Alexander Dugin, an old traditionalist kind of Russian fascist guy. Um, so he has by this point years of links with China. He taught at a Chinese university for a while. I think he still does.
Mm-hmm.
And he wants to see this Eurasian landmass from Dublin to Vladivostok kind of develop out of discrete ethno-states based on authoritarian patriarchal forms, whether they be kind of Iranian theocracy or whether they be a more kind of clearly ideologically pure fascist structure.
Mm-hmm.
But for Bannon, since he hates China so much, he wants, and his whole sort of foreign policy revolves around great power competitions in order to win Russia over to the side of the United States and combat Chinese influence internationally. Um, he can simply say that the recent sort of formation of deeper security ties between Russia and China is all Biden's fault, and that basically Biden has weakened the United States economy to the point where Putin is now forced to want to kind of be friends with Xi Jinping because America is no longer an option. It's basically a dying country, right? So he thinks this is, for him, this is the nightmare situation, the worst thing that could possibly happen. And it's all the Democrats' fault. So if you got somebody like Trump back into power, the United States would regain its swagger and would be able to win Russia back against Ukraine.
Aha. Okay, so let's talk about
I mean,
Ukraine.
oh, sorry, I meant against that was a slip against
Yeah.
China, but yeah, Ukraine is another issue as well. Yeah.
So how does Ukraine overlap with this? I mean, in your other work, you've done a lot of work in terms of the environment, but this is clearly about oil, right?
Well, I mean, the specter of the Nord Stream 2 has certainly popped up, right? I mean, it seems that there a lot of this is about LNG supply to Europe and who controls it. So certainly a fossil fuels fiasco in one sense. In another sense, there's a very real ideological effort on Putin's side to kind of flex the muscles of Great Russia or Greater Russia to the muscles of Great Russia or Greater Russia to unite what they call Russian speakers
Mm.
under a kind of sovereign blanket or sphere of influence, right? So he can tell his people that he's working to reclaim the glory of Greater Russia, and that
Hmm.
actually wins him a lot of support away from
Locally.
all the away from a lot of the dissent over lockdowns that have been pretty harsh in Russia. um in the West, I think Ukraine is significant for a number of reasons, obviously with regards to political geography and the fact that the United States and NATO in general seek to prevent the expansion of the Russian hegemony on the level that it was during the Soviet Union. But a lot of you're right, a lot of the reason for that lies in economic production rather than an ideological sort of affinity with freedom and democracy.
And of course, it's Putin's intent, as he said explicitly in multiple press conferences, even just yesterday, when he was there with uh, Macron. Um, his intent is to weaken and destabilize and maybe even break apart NATO, which of course is his who's holding him accountable. I mean, I understand that there's a lot of folks who, rightfully so, question NATO for a lot of mishandlings and I mean, yes, of course, like every institution basically out of last century is broken and not perfect.
Yeah.
Anything that neoliberals have touched. But to say that it shouldn't exist is like saying the UN shouldn't exist. Like,
It's a little bit of a, it's a tough spot, right? Because the existing framework is in a deadlock and nobody knows an appropriate way out. They only know all of the problems as they currently exist. So,
right.
It's one thing to contemplate innovative solutions and quite another to set them into place. And doing so during a period of diplomatic crisis, such
That's
as
right.
we're in, is perhaps reckless,
To say the least. Yeah. Really interesting. Okay, so what's likely to happen? I mean, if you see the far right continuing to grow, and obviously we have elections coming up this year, um, is this spreading or is it being contained? Like, where are we in terms of this far right? It's so hard to see with Ukraine right now, and to see really how powerful is this real? Is it something? Is Putin really succeeding at his strategy, and working with the far right in the U.S. to do so? Is it actually succeeding or failing? I'm very confused at this point.
yeah, I mean, that really is the question. It's sort of anybody's game at this point. There are so many problems right now. The world is definitely in a crisis on this scale that I don't know if we've really experienced since the United States started the war in Iraq. And there are so many different things that could happen between now and the elections. So it's not. I'm not pessimistic about the current situation, but I'm
Mhm.
also, I wouldn't call myself an optimist at all. I think that you talk about Bannon. I mean, their strategy has been kind of frighteningly successful thus far, of just sort of like attempting to take over election boards, of bullying
Right.
teachers, of bullying doctors, and really kind of trying to assert their agenda, such as it is. Even if all it really counts for is a kind of a power, grab. So I think the left needs a valid response that goes beyond a sort of, well, we're the ones who are trying to keep this country together, you know,
Hmm.
because that's nice and all. It's good behavior, but it's not necessarily going to win elections, right?
Right.
So on the one hand, there are processes of accountability that are currently in place, right? We're talking about the arrest of significant oath keepers, the
Hmm.
arrest of leading Proud Boys. Here in Portland, the jail sentence for the violent far right activist Alan Swinney. So there are, it would appear, consequences down the pipe. And if those consequences don't work out, if the January 6th committee basically, derails or simply falls flat, then we're going to be moving further and deeper into the crisis, because the only thing that reactionaries understand is consequence, and there just haven't been any.
I want to close with this because you may have seen that Mike Pence finally said something about the
Yeah.
January 6th riots and terrorist attacks, is what I'm calling them. He said something, and this is, I think a couple days after the RNC, the Republican Party, not only decided to side with the insurrectionists, but wants to censor both Representative Cheney and Kinzinger for basically defying their party and really, probing and investigating. Partly because, let's be clear, there were members of Congress who were in cooperation and communicating with those who were organizing on the outside in the riots.
Mhm.
So there's been a little bit of a showdown between Bannon and Mike Pence. Let's put that up there.
Said I had
There
the
we go.
to overturn the election. President Trump is wrong. I had no right to overturn the election. The presidency belongs to the American people and the American people alone. And frankly, there is no idea more un-American than the notion that any one person could choose the American president. Under the Constitution, I had no right to change the outcome of our election. And Kamala Harris will have no right to overturn the election when we beat them in 2024.
That's quite a pivot. Okay. And of course, Steve Bannon has a response.
Pence, you're gonna carry this thing eventually to your grave, okay? Because it is a mark of shame, and you are a stone cold coward. A stone cold coward. Boris Epstein. We're going to start with numbers and analysis, and then this thing broke this afternoon. My head's blown up. So Boris, you got to help me out here, brother. I can't take Pence, and I can't take Pence and Mark Short and all these Koch guys up there ratting out Trump up on Capitol Hill right now.
What?
I don't know.
Okay, I don't even care about Boris. Like, forget about that. So I have a theory on this. Only if a couple things happen. I think the Republicans who have been trying to keep their party alive are probably thinking this is a little bit too far, and that this is the kind of situation where even if Joe Biden doesn't do anything strategic on his campaign, which shocker he probably won't, and that the Senate Democrats and DCCC, they're not going to run the most strategic campaigns. It might be a wave because there are going to be so many normie Republicans, whatever those are, who are so disgusted by the fact that they're standing by the insurrectionists that it might turn in a different direction, which is why I just keep telling people, yo, just run at the local level. If you're a union member, if you're a woman, just run, because these are those kinds of years where a wave happens. Obviously, if you can run, if you're able to. I don't want to be, I want people to understand that it takes a lot of sacrifice. But if you're thinking about it, if you have the ability to, they need opponents, and the Democratic Party is doing so little to recruit, literally almost zero, that some school bill members that are insurrectionists might get in there because they don't have opposition. So if you just run, and if you can afford to do an ad showing the Republican Party, backing the insurrectionists, it's going to backfire. That's my theory, because this is ridiculous. This is Pence, trying to preserve maybe his political future, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think you're right. I absolutely. I don't know what Pence's motivation is. Maybe he is trying to preserve his own political future in a field that he sees changing in in the direction that you're talking about, right? So it could be a good sign in that sense. On the other hand, he's speaking to the Federalist Society. He could just be vaunting himself and sort of patting himself on the back for his own decision, which fine. I mean, he was the one who put the nail in the coffin of Trump's plan, regardless of his efforts to bring in everybody from Homeland Security to the NSA to whoever. At the same time, I see the far right getting together and trying to do a trucker caravan here in the United States. So Bannon's 100% behind this. Fox News is already starting to promote it. So, it seems like that is likely planned for sometime in March. So that could have kind of a pretty big impact on people's perceptions of where the GOP stands. We'll see what the truckers get up to.
Hopefully there's some leftist truckers out there who remind their colleagues that, the masks aren't the enemies. And by the way, they might not even, the pandemic that might not even be a thing anymore. I'm knock on wood, I shouldn't say that. But but it's actually like your wages and your long hours. And so maybe think about unionizing instead. Yeah,
Hey,
I don't know. We'll see.
there's power in the union.
There is. It's always our weapon, right? Fascinating conversation. This isn't going away anytime soon, so I'd love to have you back on. Always good to speak to the expert on the far right and how they're organizing and strategizing and where they're going. Alexander Reid Ross, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Nomiki. Thank you very much. I appreciate
All right,
being
enjoy
here.
your Sharknado coffee.
Yeah, cheers.
All right, take care. And to everybody else, we have some shout outs to do before we wrap up today. We have some new patrons. Craig Z, thank you. Erik M, John A, and Carlos C. Love this energy. Thank you for joining us, patrons. And some super chats. Let me, if I can read this. Big Olameo. Thank you so much for your incredibly kind contribution. Says, the days are getting worse. Glad that Nomi, David, and Ben are here to keep me from sliding into the despair abyss. Thanks, guys. Left is best. Indeed it is. And Gabe, thank you for your love. And on Twitch, we've got Platinum Ninja. Thanks for joining. Oh gosh, I can't see. It's my glasses, guys. I'm getting old, okay? Umar H. Sories, thank you. You've been subscribed for 6 whole months. Really grateful to you. And Nug Wrangler resubscribed, been subscribed for 13 months. We know you, Nug Wrangler. And then Pagan Communist resubscribed. Thank you so much. It's been a year. Platinum Ninja cheered 100 bits. Thank you. And Bad Bunny. What's up, Bad Bunny, rating us? Thank you, Bad Bunny. We love you. Love to everybody else for joining us. If you're not a patron already, this is where we support each other. It's a hard world out there for independent leftist media, and people ask, like, how are you able to produce this show? Someone asked in our comments the other day, and it's because of our patrons. And really, the ecosystem has changed a lot since the Trump election, but our patrons have really kept the show going, and we have an incredible patron community. We are so grateful for your support. If you used to be a patron, if you had a cutback, please email us at thenomikishow@gmail.com. We will find a way to make it work. If you can afford to go to a higher level, that helps pay for the other patrons who may have to take some time off. Super grateful. We start, let's scroll that screen back up. We start at $5 a month. And then you can go all the way up and you get, swag, whether it's stickers, mugs, a tote bag, you get special patron privileges and interviews. So thank you to everybody. Go check us out at patreon.com/The Nomiki Show.